Before I get started, just a quick suggestion. If you haven't listened to episode 1 of Force of Law, you probably want to stop now and go do that. It's about 37 minutes long. And please be aware that this program includes sound from violent incidents.
Hello? Hi, everybody. Hi, Lori. Thank you all for coming.
On a cold February night, Lori Valdez and about 30 friends and relatives gathered on the street in San Jose, where university police had killed her partner 5 years earlier.
I don't want to talk about how he died today, but I want to share with you guys some stories of how he lived, so you guys could kind of get to know who he was, and so you guys will understand the reason why it's so hard.
On the sidewalk, Lori had set up a shrine with flowers and prayer candles resting beside a poster board covered with pictures of Antonio. But this night wasn't only about him. Standing with Lori were other people who, like her, are grieving the loss of a loved one killed by police.
I have my sister Vicky, I have Amanda, Richie, Jim, Sharon, Rosie, her mom, I have Regina here.
These were people from not very far away who lost their sons, nephews, boyfriends. California police kill someone on average every 2 or 3 days, a rate that's higher than the national average, even when accounting for the state's large population. Those gathered here, venting their grief and their anger, they were just some of the many Californians living with the aftermath.
We all walk in this path we didn't want to walk. We have no choice. And we're trying to do what we can for our community so we can make a difference for you guys so you guys won't have to walk this path with us.
Lori had an appointment the next day to see the body cam video San Jose State University police recorded when they shot Antonio. She was feeling anxious.
Tomorrow at 11, say a prayer that I don't go losing it and that I'm able to function after for my children. I'm trying to prepare myself, but there's no preparing for what I'm going to see.
The next morning, Lori sat down in a pristine conference room with university official Charlie Foss.
So, first off, I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
I'm the campus vice president for admin. All right, so I'm going to be here. I'm going to let you go through the video. I'm here to answer any questions you might have. I'm sorry. Do you have some tissues with you?
No.
Okay, I will get you some.
Okay.
I just think that's important.
Water too, please? Some water or something?
Behind Lori stood a sisterhood of supporters. One friend whose son had been killed by police, another who had lost a nephew. 2 activists sat nearby. Charlie Foss handed Lori a tablet computer, and she started playing the video.
Get on the ground. Shoot him. Shots fired. Shots fired. Where's the knife? Right
Oh my God. He wasn't trying. He was saying it's okay. He was trying. Tell him he was going to leave. He was going somewhere. He was saying it's okay. I'm leaving. Why didn't... Oh my God. Why did they kill him?
Watching Lori watch this video, it reminded me how little common ground there is in the debate over police shootings in America. Every part of the justice system that had reviewed the footage, including prosecutors considering criminal charges and judges in a civil lawsuit, determined that the police acted legally when they shot Antonio Guzman Lopez. He was holding a saw blade about a foot long. The cops ordered him to drop it, and he didn't. They tased him. Then he ran toward one of the officers holding the blade in his hand. In the eyes of the law, these circumstances justify the use of deadly force. Here's what Charlie Foss from San Jose State told me about Antonio after Lori had left the room.
If you were to put the blade down, this wouldn't have happened. It's the police's responsibility to protect from violent or threatening issues. And any number of folks saw this individual as violent and threatening on a college campus with 35,000 students.
Lori looked at that video, though, and saw a loving father who was holding a construction tool he had probably scavenged. She knew Antonio didn't understand English and was afraid of the police, so she saw him trying to run away. She can't understand how the law justified this killing. Now Lori and the friends who surrounded her are pushing to change the law in California to limit when police can use deadly force. It's a supercharged question in the state capitol, and that's what we're exploring in this series. I'm Laurel Rosenhall, and this is Force of Law, a podcast about police shootings and California's attempt to do something about them. This episode explains 2 bills California is considering to limit the use of deadly force. Civil rights activists back one of the bills. Law enforcement groups support the other. Some details in the legislation changed while we were working on this episode. They may change further by the time you hear it. That's because making any new law, especially one about life and death matters, is a really fluid process. Competing camps start in their own corners, and then through pushback, debate, amendments, sometimes they compromise. But along the way, players may shift positions if these compromises seem too great. All of this is part of the story we're telling as we follow California's attempt to reduce police shootings.
I believe that we will win.
I believe that we will win.
Say, I know that we will win.
I know that we will win.
Lobbying on the 2 bills got going as winter turned to spring. On this March day, pastors from around California gathered at the state capitol. They stood in front of a bank of elevators, preparing to drop in on lawmakers' offices upstairs. They were going to lobby against the bill law enforcement backed and for the bill that would set a tougher standard to justify police shootings.
All right, go up to floor 5.
Reverend Ben McBride, with an Oakland-based community organizing group called PICO California, was leading about 24 people. After getting off the elevator, they huddled in the hallway.
Here's one thing I want to hold up for all of us. We must remember that this is the people's house. This is the people's house. So we have to recognize when we come in these spaces, we are not visitors. We belong here. And so I want to just invite us to all take a moment, ground yourself in your faith tradition, center yourself, take a knee. Remember why you're here. I want us all to close your eyes and think about a name of someone that you know who've been lost to police violence. I want you to get their face in your mind. Get their name in your mind, in your heart. Hold them. And as you feel ready, I just want you to say their names. Mario Woods. Alex Nieto. Oscar.
First stop for the clergy and activists, the office of State Senator Ana Caballero, the Democrat from Salinas whose bill spells out law enforcement's proposal for how California can decrease police shootings. Senator Caballero's bill would give officers more training on use of force rules. It also would have police departments adopt policies that spell out de-escalation tactics and alternatives to deadly force. McBride and the other activists here don't like it, though, because on this day the bill includes a standard for justifying force that they say is just too lax.
We'll invite our faith leaders in. And so we know Senator Caballero is not here.
Her chief of staff listened politely as Reverend McBride said his piece.
We are a statewide network of approximately 400 congregations from around the state of California. Congregations also coming out of Salinas and out of the district of Senator Caballero. We're here because we have deep concern about Senator Caballero's sponsorship of SB 230.
That's right. That's right.
Particularly because SB 230 is a bill that compromises the will of the people to be able to pass AB 392.
That's the state assembly bill these pastors are supporting. It would create an unusually tough statewide standard for justifying police use of deadly force. And it would make it easier to prosecute police when they kill. Police also paid lobbying visits to the Capitol to urge the exact opposite.
I'm Robert Harris. I am the director with the Los Angeles Police Protective League and the president for Protect California.
That's a group law enforcement unions formed to lobby on police use of force. Rob explained what they're doing as he walked the Capitol halls with 2 lobbyists and 3 other cops. One of them was Steve Gordon. He has an interesting story that I'll share with you in a bit. For now, though, here's Rob Harris.
So as some of the larger police associations got together in a coalition, we started having an honest conversation about what is our strategic goal in this. And if the strategic goal is to reduce the number of uses of force or reduce the number of officer-involved shootings, how can we best accomplish this?
They didn't want to change the legal standard for using force because they say that could put officers' safety at risk. Instead, they came up with the plan in Senator Caballero's bill to strengthen police policies and training around conflict de-escalation and averting deadly force. They're also lobbying for more spending to address broader societal problems.
And we're looking at everything from increasing better educational and employment opportunities in high crime areas. We're looking at trying to address the mental health issues, but on the flip side, making sure that our officers, our frontline officers, receive better training in how to deal with people suffering from a mental health crisis.
The group let me tag along as they worked the Capitol, as long as I agreed to stay out of their private meetings with lawmakers. So when you go in here to this assembly member's office, what is your core message that you're going to try to convey to her?
So our core message is the law enforcement coalitions recognize that the shared goal is to try to reduce the number of uses of force and officer-involved shootings. And this is how our associations have come up with a plan to do that. And then I'll pretty much tell her what I just told you, and that this is our plan. Now, where can you help us on that? Where do you have questions on that?
Are you, in addition to be lobbying for your own bill, are you going to be asking her to vote no on AB 392?
Yes. Our number one goal is to educate each of the members on our plan versus just the bill of AB 392. But in the course of those dialogues, yes, we will be asking them to oppose 392.
Well, I will see you in a few. Thanks. The most significant difference between the bills the police and the activists support came down to how to limit when police can use deadly force. The activist bill says police can only shoot when it's necessary to avoid death or serious injury, when there are no other alternatives for handling a situation. The bill the police backed said the use of force must be reasonable, the standard the U.S. Supreme Court set 30 years ago in 1989. To explain how the Supreme Court made that ruling, I'm going to tell you about a man named D. Thorne Graham. The story starts in North Carolina in 1984, when Graham's diabetes caused his blood sugar to drop one day.
And he called upon a friend to take him to a convenience store where he could purchase some orange juice to help counteract the effect of the insulin reaction.
This is Graham's lawyer, H. Gerald Beaver, speaking to the Supreme Court in 1989.
Upon arriving there, he noted that because of a line, it would take him a long time to get his orange juice. And he became concerned and ran to his friend's car and motioned for him to take him to his girlfriend's house.
They drove about a half mile when a police officer pulled them over. He'd seen Graham run into the store and quickly run out and thought it was suspicious. After the officer stopped them, Graham was acting strange.
He exited the car and ran around it twice and then sat down on the curb.
More police officers arrived. Graham's friend, William Berry, told the officers he was diabetic and needed some sugar. But they blew him off and said Graham was just drunk.
They handcuffed him very tightly. So tightly that at the conclusion of this episode, he had cut wrists. And they lifted him up by his arms, and they carried him to the hood of Mr. Berry's car and laid him over it.
Graham survived the encounter, but it hurt him pretty badly.
He had a broken foot, and he had a large abrasion over his right eye, an injured right shoulder that prohibited him to the extent that for 2 weeks he could not administer his own insulin shots.
So Graham sued the police, claiming they'd used excessive force. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Here's Justice Thurgood Marshall questioning Mark Levy, the lawyer for one of the officers.
What was he doing that was so violent that he had to be handcuffed?
You have to go back one step even before that. Officer Connor saw a petitioner act in a very suspicious and unusual manner. He saw Connor hurry into a convenience store. No, it wasn't clear. He saw him hurry into a convenience store.
Well, what did he do that was violent?
Excuse me?
What did he do that was violent? I'm talking about before they put the handcuffs on him. What was he doing before they tried to put the handcuffs on him?
In the end, the court ruled that authorities must judge police use of force by whether it is objectively reasonable. That means recognizing that police officers are often forced to make split-second judgments in circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving. The court also said authorities must analyze uses of force from the perspective of the officer on the scene, and not with the benefit of hindsight. They sent Graham's case back to a lower court for a new trial using that standard, and he lost. The jury found the officer's use of force against Graham was reasonable. Over the years, this Supreme Court decision has become
essentially a pillar of police orthodoxy.
This is Seth Stoughton.
I'm a law professor at the University of South Carolina, where I study policing and the regulation of policing, including the use of force.
Stoughton was a police officer in Florida for 5 years before he became a legal scholar. He's reviewed use of force policies all over the country. Some of them go beyond the standards set in Graham, further limiting when or how police can use force. Many other places, though, stick to the reasonable standard, the way police wanted to in California.
So in some ways, I think Graham v. Connor had the unanticipated effect of preventing police agencies from providing officers with more robust guidance about how to approach use of force situations and about how to use force, when and how to use different force options.
So it sounds like you're saying that the problem with the reasonable standard is that it's just too squishy.
It's very squishy.
Stoughton supports the bill to toughen California's standard. He said some parts of it emulate deadly force policies in states or cities, including San Francisco and Seattle. But AB 392 does one thing that would stand out among state laws. It calls for judging whether a shooting is necessary by analyzing not only what an officer perceived at the moment he or she pulled the trigger, but also by peeling back a few steps and looking at what led to that moment in the first place. If the officer's tactical decisions, like running in front of a car with the driver behind the wheel, or acting more hastily than circumstances require, if that's what led to the imminent danger that caused the officer to shoot, then the shooting would not be justified. Law enforcement calls this
an impossible standard.
This is Shane Levine, a lobbyist for the California Fraternal Order of Police.
AB 392 would require superhuman decision-making that is simply not possible.
Stoughton, by contrast, argues that California needs a stronger law because so many police shootings happen here.
California has a rather bizarrely, disproportionately high rate of police shootings compared to the national average. It's 25% higher than the national average. And what's even more interesting to me is when you look only at the states with a relatively large population, and I drew a line at 8 million, There are 12 states in that group, and all but 2 of them have a rate that's lower than the national average. The only high population states that have a higher than the national average rate of lethal police shootings are Georgia and California.
The state's law enforcement leaders want to reduce those numbers, but not by making it easier to prosecute police. Still, it's clear they're working towards some kind of compromise. 2 weeks before their bill got its first hearing, law enforcement groups announced changes to it. Their amendments would stiffen the requirements in police department policies, so all of them would have to spell out when officers can and can't draw a firearm, and also what they can do to avoid using deadly force. One thing few people talk about very openly is the effect of police shootings on police.
Most police officers who I know who have ever had to use deadly force are not the same afterwards.
John Carley is the police chief in Vacaville, California.
The taking of a life is not some flippant act that somehow when people decide to serve in a police department, that they hope that someday that they get to shoot and kill someone. Just the opposite is the case. I see wrecked, messed up police officers that are emotionally trying to figure what happened, what could they have done, and sometimes they don't recover from that.
That's pretty much what happened to Steve Gordon, the Los Angeles police officer I mentioned earlier. He was in the group of cops lobbying at the Capitol. The day before that, we sat down to talk.
The last thing I ever want to do is get in another shooting. I think it took me 2-3 years to get over the last one.
Steve's been a cop in Los Angeles for 31 years. For about half that time, he was on the SWAT team, responding to really dangerous situations. On a sunny day in 2014, a call came over the radio.
It came out as a officer needs help call, and it said a man walking around with a shotgun. He was in front of the house, he was behind the house, but they believe he's in this house now. So I was there with my partner. Another 2 police officers show up, and a lady comes walking down the street just very casually. And she walked right up to me and started giving me a lecture as if she was like a relative, saying, "Listen to me."
It was the man's wife, and this is what she was telling Steve.
He's okay. He's got a shotgun. I don't know if it's loaded or it might be loaded, and he's in the house, but he'll be okay.
Then the front door opened.
And here comes a guy marching out of the house carrying a shotgun. And the wheels already start turning. Wait a second. This is not exactly what I expected to happen.
The man stood on his front lawn, looking around at what was going on.
And I just happened to have a police rifle, a military-type rifle. And he looked at me, worked the action on the shotgun, and then pointed it at me. And believing he was going to kill me or miss and kill the people standing next to me or behind me, I fired my weapon, knocking them down. And that's, when you just go, what the hell just happened? You actually had the wife of the man with the shotgun. She was standing right there too.
How did she react when it happened?
It wasn't pretty. Yeah, she did a lot of screaming, mostly at me. And that hurt. Just walking back to the car, having her try to get at me, yelling at me, screaming at me, that was probably the longest walk of my life.
I talked to the man's wife recently. She told me she's suffering post-traumatic stress from watching a cop kill her husband. 5 years after the incident, she said she wasn't ready to record an interview. If she changes her mind, we'll bring you her story in a future episode. I also read the LA District Attorney's review of this shooting. Here's the key sentence. Given the rapidly evolving, life-threatening situation that confronted Officer Gordon, we conclude that he acted lawfully in self-defense and defense of others. Still, that didn't completely put Steve at ease as he learned more about the man he'd killed.
It was later determined that the shotgun was unloaded. He had either told his wife or told 911 that he planned on committing suicide by cop. It was also later determined that he was a retired Los Angeles firefighter, and he was also a survivor of 9/11 or one of the rescue people. And he might have also had PTSD from his experience there. And that kind of just made me kind of look at police work a lot different, where I just went, wait a second. I came on the job to catch bad guys and save the innocent, not help people die, not help a man commit suicide that was no longer happy with his life.
This wasn't the first time Steve had shot someone while on duty, but the circumstances this time really affected him.
That wasn't a bad guy. Yeah, that guy just had issues. He didn't need the police. He needed help.
Steve began acting as kind of a peer counselor to other cops coping with the stresses of the job. But that last shooting fundamentally changed him. He really wanted to get out of police work. He ran for a position at the police officers union and won. So that removed him from some street duty for a couple of years and launched him on this lobbying trip to Sacramento.
It just seems like we're dealing with more mentally ill and drug-fueled people that are out of their minds, and it almost just turns around what you thought you would be doing as a career. I feel more like a social worker with a gun than the sheriff with the badge that catches the bad guys.
Here is some critical context about police shootings. First, police come into contact with tens of millions of Americans each year, and a minuscule portion of those interactions end in fatal shootings. One expert put it at 2/100,000ths of 1%. Also, the vast majority of people California officers kill are armed. About 42% carried a gun, 22% had a knife, and 16% had some other kind of weapon, based on our analysis of 4 years of data tracked by the Washington Post. Many families who want to change the use of force standard lost a loved one who was holding a knife or a gun. Some were on drugs or were suicidal. These numbers have made me wonder how many shootings California might prevent if the state changes the legal standard for police to use force, since police would still be able to shoot when it's necessary to prevent death or serious injury. I put the question to ACLU lobbyist Lizzie Buchan. She's pushing for the bill that would change the standard.
You know, the people who are getting killed, by and large, have weapons.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I'm just wondering if you think that under your bill, any of these people who have a gun or a knife or a toy weapon would not be killed under your bill.
It's hard to tell just from the data because we don't know that, if someone had a gun, were they actually brandishing it? Was it displayed in a threatening way? Was there reason to believe that they were going to harm someone and that someone's life was in danger? If so, then our bill would not have impacted that.
If someone has a knife, though, Lizzie said officers should mostly be able to handle this situation without shooting.
Knives, in general, do not kill police officers. They can still pose a threat, but they don't pose the kind of threat that a firearm poses. I do think that it could have an impact on the number of people killed who had a knife.
But people brandishing a toy gun? Lizzie says the police would generally still be justified in shooting them.
If someone is pointing something that looks like a firearm at an officer, this bill is not going to change whether the officer can use deadly force. And similarly, it's not going to prevent every death of someone who's unarmed, because there are situations where they're acting in such a way that the officer really feels like there is a threat to their life, and maybe they think they're armed and they're not.
One case Lizzie says would likely have been prosecuted under the ACLU's bill is that of Mario Woods. He was holding a knife when San Francisco police killed him in 2015.
Drop that knife.
You're hearing eyewitness video footage. It shows several officers surrounding Woods, who's standing next to a wall.
Drop that knife, homeboy. Drop the knife. Drop the knife, man.
The police started with pepper spray and beanbag guns.
Whoa!
Drop that knife, man. It ain't worth it. It ain't worth it, bro. Drop the knife.
He didn't. Officers opened fire, shooting 26 rounds.
They just killed him like that, dude? That's unnecessary, man. That's fucking unnecessary.
San Francisco District Attorney George Gascon said almost the exact same thing at a later press conference, even as he decided not to charge the officers involved.
The conflict that I have is that I don't necessarily believe that the use of force was necessary, right? But the law doesn't necessarily care about whether it was necessary or not.
Gascon said he couldn't charge the police because he couldn't prove that the shooting was unreasonable. The reasonable standard has frustrated civil rights activists for a long time. For years, they tried to get California lawmakers to change it. But with police so opposed, legislators weren't even willing to introduce the idea in a bill. That changed in 2018, after Sacramento police killed Stephon Clark, mistaking the cell phone he was holding for a gun. The DA said the officers acted lawfully.
No justice! No justice!
On the first anniversary of Stephon Clark's death, Reverend Al Sharpton flew from New York and joined the Clark family at a Sacramento church for a huge gathering that was part memorial, part political rally.
We need it as a matter of law that police cannot just say they were under threat. They've got to show there was no option available but to use deadly force.
After the service, the family of another high-profile shooting victim mingled outside with Clark's grandmother to reassure her that they're building a movement.
We knew that this was important. This is for the nation and Sacramento to know that we as families that's been impacted are standing with the Stephon Clark family.
That's Cephas Johnson, the uncle of Oscar Grant, who died after a transit officer shot him in Oakland. And this is his wife, Beatrice, talking with Clark's grandma, Sequita Thompson.
When he asked what does California Families United mean, I said it means we come together for justice.
Yes, we come for justice. Without no justice, it ain't no peace. Right. So we're going to fight for justice. We're going to win. We're going to win.
We're going to stay united.
Yes.
We're not letting anybody divide these families.
Political reality put all that lobbying to the test in April 2019, when AB 392, the bill to change the standard for justifying deadly force, faced its first hearing in the state capitol. Lori Valdez and her 9-year-old son Josiah woke up at 3:30 one morning to make the 120-mile drive from San Jose to Sacramento.
Hello? Okay, I'll go para afuera. Okay, bye. Come on, Josiah, let's go.
Several of the same friends who were at Antonio's memorial service were with Lori again for this trip. They'd rented a few vans, and gripping their coffee mugs, they prepared to hit the road.
Morning. Hey! How are you? Nice to meet you. Are we ready? You ready? You're here? Okay. Hey, Yoli. Come on.
Okay, your crew's going with Yoli.
Susan. Yeah. Amanda, Brian.
During the drive, Josiah slept, and Lori told her friend about her daughter's recent trip to look at colleges.
She liked UC Irvine a lot. She really liked that college.
What'd she like about it?
The nursing program.
Okay.
She wants to become a neonatal nurse.
They got to Sacramento, looked for parking,
Right here.
and made their way to a hearing room inside the Capitol.
You guys can't go in the elevator.
Can?
That's for members of the
legislature.
Oh.
You ready? The Assembly Committee on Public Safety is now in order.
Every seat in the room was full as Committee Chairman Reggie Jones Sawyer opened the meeting. More people filled the hallway outside, watching the proceedings on a TV and waiting for their turn to speak. Assemblywoman Shirley Weber presented her bill, and then the supporters testified. Weber had 2 retired cops argue for her bill. One of them was Cheryl Dorsey.
Sergeant. As a retired veteran sergeant of the Los Angeles Police Department, having spent 20 years in patrol, I was involved in dealing with violent criminals on a daily basis. I shot no one. I had suspects run from me, fight me, curse me. I shot no one. For those who say that having officers go through a mental checklist prior to firing their weapon would endanger their lives, I say they are being intellectually dishonest. For those who say that AB 392 will negatively influence potential recruits, I say that not everyone who wants to be the police should be the police. What we're seeing is that officers are using deadly force as a first resort when they can't catch someone, when someone is failing to comply, as opposed to a last resort, which is what officers are taught to do after you've done everything that you have available to you.
Then the opponents testified. They included one who'd also faced violent suspects, but had a very different view.
My name is Julie Robertson, and I'm a deputy sheriff with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. On September 17, 2018, my partner, Mark Stasiuk, and I were dispatched to a customer disturbance at a local auto store where a store clerk and I were shot. Mark was shot and killed. Within 10 seconds of arriving at the store, the subject began shooting at us. As he was finding cover, the gunman continued to fire at Mark while chasing him, resulting in Mark's almost immediate death. At one point during the firefight, the gunman began shooting with only his back exposed to me. I recall in that moment thinking that if I were to shoot him in the back, I would be the next officer in the news being scrutinized for my actions. Despite the fact that he just murdered my partner, shot one of the store clerks, and also shot me. The thought of having to second guess my actions in that moment is frightening.
This deputy didn't get much love from the hearing room crowd.
Thank you. Shh. Respect, please.
During the 3-hour hearing, more than 100 other people addressed the committee. One of them was Oscar Grant's uncle.
Cephas, Uncle Bobby Johnson, California Families United for Justice, strong support.
Good morning, my name is Denise Friday. I'm the mother of Kobe Friday. Say his name. Kobe Friday. Say his name. He was assassinated by Officer David Wells in Stockton, California in 2016.
A much shorter line of opponents, including relatives of officers who were killed, stepped up.
Hi, my name's Eric Paris. I'm brother to slain Deputy Robert Paris. I'm here on behalf of my family in opposition to the bill as written.
Good afternoon. Mercedes Wallace. I'm a survivor, spouse of a murdered deputy, and I'm in total opposition of this.
Democrats who control the committee were split. Though all of them were willing to vote for the bill to advance, some said they had concerns about the details. They demanded that Assemblywoman Weber work with law enforcement groups to try and broker a compromise.
This bill does not in any way, we hope, put any officer at harm. That is not the intent. It is to once again address the critical issues we've faced in this nation for 400 years of how we treat others who don't look like us and how they feel sometimes being unfairly treated. It is not designed in any way to victimize anyone, but it is designed to change the culture of policing in California so that we arrive at a situation where every individual is treated with respect and that we respect life, and that is so important. We ask that you continue to work with us as we will continue to work with the officers who want to work on behalf of change. But it is clear that change has to come to California. And AB 392 is the first step in that change. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Committee chair called for a vote.
I'm a very optimistic individual. I think we're going to hopefully get to a place where we can end this trauma on both sides. And with that,
on AB 392, the motion is due pass to the Rules Committee. Jones Sawyer.
Aye.
Jones Sawyer, aye. Lackey.
The panel voted along party lines.
That measure passes, Dr. Weber.
Lori and her friends went out for pizza. By the time they piled into the vans headed back to San Jose, everyone was exhausted from the long, emotional day. And Lori was nervous about what the calls for compromise could mean.
I'm glad it passed, but I'm tired as heck. I'm like, and the fight just begun.
2 weeks later, Lori again woke up before dawn to travel to Sacramento for another hearing, this time to oppose Senator Caballero's bill. She and other activists followed a familiar script. They filled the corridor outside the hearing room. Many wore T-shirts memorializing the people they'd loved and lost. Law enforcement lobbyists, sporting suits and ties, huddled in a tight circle. And then everyone who fit in the hearing room took their seats when Senator Caballero arrived.
First, let me thank the committee and the chair for your assistance and patience in working with all the parties to make this bill better.
What she said next surprised a lot of people.
Second, we are taking as authors amendments, 2 amendments. 1, to delete the findings and declarations, section 1F, and 2, to delete section 3 of the bill relating to Penal Code 196. And finally, to add section 6, which would join my bill with AB 392.
In response to this dry, technical announcement, people gasped. The senator was saying she'd change her bill to delete the paragraphs requiring California adhere to the Supreme Court's reasonable standard. She also said she'd make the passage of her own bill dependent on the passage of Weber's bill. The activists' faces were like, wait, what? Lizzie Buchan ran across the room to huddle with some of them as law enforcement leaders spoke in favor of the amendments, including Ron Lawrence, president of the California Police Chiefs Association.
SB 230 will result in significant and positive change, but we understand that training and policies are not the only part of the solution.
The last-minute changes caught the activists off guard, and they stuck to their plan to oppose the bill. As dozens of people spoke, Oscar Grant's uncle offered comfort and maintained order. When mothers cried, he wrapped his arms around their shoulders. When fathers talked too long, he gently encouraged them to wrap it up. The face of his own nephew, whose killing in 2009 helped spark this movement, radiated across the room from the back of Uncle Bobby's shirt. Testimony like this went on for more than an hour, and then Senator Caballero explained why she'd changed her bill.
The bottom line is the only part that talks about the use of force standard is in Dr. Shirley Weber's bill, and my bill is linked with hers. So if hers doesn't get through, then it all disappears. I don't think any of us want it all to disappear. I think we want to get some resolution. And so what this does is it keeps everybody at the table negotiating in good faith, trying to work towards a solution.
The committee voted
Aye.
and passed the new version of the bill. Here's how Uncle Bobby responded.
It appears that it could be a positive.
Lori Valdez said she didn't feel that hopeful.
I think they're going to try to water down our bill.
Lizzie Buchan with the ACLU said she expects negotiations with law enforcement are going to heat up.
So I think that this puts them in a position where they have to do that or they're torpedoing their own bill.
Even so, it's not certain the police groups will get behind major changes to the standard for using deadly force. Brian Marvel, president of a statewide federation of police unions, made clear where he stands.
Well, my personal feelings, and like I said earlier, I can't speak for the coalition, but I think Graham v. Connor and the Tennessee versus Garner, I think the Supreme Court got it right. It was a 9-0 ruling with the Supreme Court back in the late 80s. So I think that is something where we could start working on from there.
Although the changes to the police bill emerged as an unexpected plot twist, they reflect political realities inside the state capitol, where Democrats hold all the power. First of all, progressive Democrats from California's most liberal cities dominate the state Senate's Public Safety Committee. They probably would have rejected the law enforcement bill without significant changes. Second, by removing the legal standard from Caballero's bill, the focus of that debate now turns to Weber's bill. It means both sides will lobby the full assembly, which must approve her bill by the end of May 2019 for it to advance during the current session. Democrats hold 3/4 of the seats in the assembly, but they skew more moderate than Democrats in the Senate. And a handful of assembly Dems have strong ties to law enforcement. The politics of the assembly could help the dueling sides reach a compromise. Or the whole debate could fall apart. You're listening to Force of Law, a production of CalMatters and Studio To Be. I'm your host, Laurel Rosenhall. Brian Howie produced this episode and helped me report it. Cheryl Duvall is our editor. Catherine Raimondo is our audio engineer. Robbie Short is our researcher. David Lesher of CalMatters and Joaquin Alvarado and Kristen Belden of Studio To Be are the executive producers. Thanks also to Chloe Behrens and Zach Moreno from Squadcast. We appreciate the use of archival news footage from San Francisco news stations KQED and ABC7, and a recording of U.S. Supreme Court testimony from oye.org, a multimedia archive affiliated with the Cornell Law School.